dog on the spot what he was standing on, and didn't taste meat again for 3 days." Shortly after the conclusion of Joe's story they reached the camp, and here they found the women and children flying about in a state of terror, and the few men who had been left in charge arming themselves in the greatest haste. "Hallo! Something wrong here?" cried Cameron, hastening forward, followed by Joe. "What has happened, eh?" "Injuns coming, monsieur. Look there," answered a trapper, pointing down the valley. "Arm and mount at once, and come to the front of the camp," cried Cameron in a tone of voice that silenced every other and turned confusion into order. The cause of all this outcry was a cloud of dust seen far down the valley, which was raised by a band of mounted Indians who approached the camp at full speed. Their numbers could not be made out, but they were a sufficiently formidable band to cause much anxiety to Cameron, whose men at the time were scattered to the various trapping grounds, and only 10 chanced to be within a call of the camp. However, with these 10 he determined to show a bold front to the savages, whether they came as friends or foes. He therefore ordered the women and children within the citadel, formed of the goods and packs of furs piled upon each other, which point of retreat was to be defended to the last extremity. Then galloping to the front, he collected his men and swept down the valley at full speed. In a few minutes they were near enough to observe the enemy, and that it only numbered 4 Indians, who were driving a band of about 100 horses before them, and so busy were they in keeping the troop together that Cameron and his men were close upon them before they were observed. It was too late to escape. Joe Blunt and Henry had already swept round and cut off their retreat. In this extremity the Indians slipped from the backs of their steeds and darted into the bushes, where they were safe from pursuit, at least on horseback, while the trappers got behind the horses and drove them towards the camp. At this moment one of the horses sprang ahead of the others and made for the mountain, with its mane and tail flying wildly in the breeze. "Marrow bones and buttons!" shouted one of the men. "There goes Dick Varley's horse." "So it am!" cried Henry, and dashed off in pursuit, followed by Joe and 2 others. "Why, these are our own horses," said Cameron in surprise, as they drove them into a corner of the hills from which they could not escape. This was true, but it was only half the truth, for besides their own horses they had secured upwards of 70 Indian steeds, a most acceptable addition to their stud, which, owing to casualties and wolves, had been diminishing too much of late. The fact was that the Indians who had captured the horses belonging to Pierre and his party were a small band of robbers who had traveled, as was afterwards learned, a considerable distance from the south, stealing horses from various tribes as they went along. As we have seen, in an evil hour they fell in love with Pierre's party and carried off their steeds, which they drove to a pass leading from one valley to the other. Here they united them with the main band of their ill-gotten gains, and while the greater number of the robbers descended further into the plains in search of more booty, 4 of them were sent into the mountains with the horses already procured. These 4, utterly ignorant of the presence of white men in the valley, drove their charge, as we have seen, almost into the camp. Cameron immediately organized a party to go out in search of Pierre and his companions, about whose fate he became intensely anxious, and in the course of half an hour as many men as he could spare with safety were dispatched in the direction of the Blue Mountains. Chapter 22.